sinful relationships. And he goes from Proverbs chapter 5, talking about women, to Proverbs chapter 6, dealing with wealth. That's mighty funny, them two chapters back to back. But it's just the way life is sometimes. And we're going to talk about that. Before we get started, let's look at Psalm chapter 37. I'm going to tell you something, and I'm going to tell you what Charles Spurgeon said. And I'm going to tell you what Charles Stanley happened to Charles Stanley. I don't know if you know this or not, but there's a couple of times in Charles Stanley's life he got beat up. I mean, people in the church just jumped on him. And one time they was up there having a meeting. Charles Stanley walked up on the platform. They punched him in the face. And there was another time when he was trying to instruct somebody and they didn't like what the Bible said and they hit him. So Charles Spurgeon said this. He said, the Bible is like a tiger. You don't have to defend a tiger. You know that? You know what you got to do to the tiger? Let it out of the cage. It'll do its own defending. You don't have to worry about that. So we don't have to worry about when the Bible speaks, I can either obey it or not obey it, but I don't have to rationalize it. A lot of times we get caught up in trouble where we look at the Bible and it really don't mean what it says. Well, let me say this to you. God meant what he said and said what he meant. Very important. So somebody called Dr. Stanley one time and said, Dr. Stanley, is it a sin to borrow money? That's what they asked him. He said, no, not at all. He said, where does the sin come in? Charles Stanley read this verse of scripture to him. Psalm 37, verse 21. Here's what it says. It said, the wicked borrows and don't pay again, but the righteous showeth mercy and grace. He said, the problem ain't the borrowing the money. The problem is not paying it back. He said, the Bible says the wicked. Well, about that time, the guy got mad at Charles Stanley and took a swing at him. He said, you called me wicked. Charles Stanley said, I didn't do no such thing. My name's Charles Stanley. God called you wicked, if that's what you got going on. So going in debt, it's not the sin, it's not paying it back, it's the sin. That's what this whole chapter is about. We're going to talk about that. Now, you bear in mind, we're in a generational thing now. My grandmother grew up in the Depression. She didn't trust banks. I remember my 60-year-old grandmother telling me when I was a little boy, the banks aren't going to get me again. Now, what was she talking about? Well, if you know your history or anything, the banks collapsed in the Great Depression. Who knew that? People lost their savings, they lost their investments. My grandmother's family, they had a little store. They lost their little store in Rome, Georgia, Cedartown, and just really had a tough time. So my grandmother used an old bank called C&S Bank. How many of y'all seen them in C&S Bank? Sure. She used that bank as a check cashing operation, but never wrote a check. She paid cash and everything. And I remember Gulf Life, y'all might not know Gulf Life, had the big orange debit envelope. She kept all her money in about 20 of those just scattered through our little trailer. When she died, the old lady had about $40. My grandmother raised. That's not a lot of money, but here's what she told me. She said, Greg, the banks are going to crash again. They're not going to get me. Okay, my daddy's generation, they started borrowing. My generation started spending. The next generation after me started charging. The generation after them, where we are now, we just take it. You seen these happens, these kids, they don't get what they want, just go crazy. So what's happened? Well, we've had a generational thing. And there was a generation who saved and bought. Then there's a generation who charged it. And what took mom and daddy 35 and 40 years to get, kids want it all right now. And so we get into some of that. And it's a blight. Debt's a curse on the American church. You know how many people would like to go to the mission field but can't because they're drowning in debt? It's bad. They taxed out their eyeballs doing what they can. So I want to help. I'm not going to preach. I'm not going to bust your chops. But I'm just telling you, debt's crippling America. Debt is crippling the work of God. Very important. You know how many churches build buildings that can't pay for them? And just very tough times. That's a bad testimony. When a church buys something and can't pay for it. And I walk kind of guard around that because I know preachers. I know one preacher right now who led a church in 3 building projects and would leave right in the middle of them because God told him to leave. Well, guess what happens to the church? People leave and, do all kinds of stuff. The church has to sometimes foreclose or take a higher interest loan and all this other stuff. That's not the way to do things. So Greg, what's all that talking about? That's what this chapter is about. Remember I told you the book of Proverbs is about really practical wisdom? If you make $20, you can't spend 40. If you spend 40, you got to come up with the other 20 somewhere. And guess what? That's where them credit cards come in. I don't know if you know this, but the Federal Trade Commission passed a law as far as servicemen, people's in the Army, cannot pay over 30% interest on credit card and title homes because they were taking advantage. Some servicemen was getting out of the military, and they would charge them 50% interest on a loan. Now, those of you might be a little slow, let me explain to you what that means. If you borrowed $10, they're charging you $5 to borrow it. That's short loan. That's when they start capping your knees off in the gangsters. That's the reason why if you ever go to Fort Benning and you go right down Victory Drive, there's a bunch of telephones all over the place. What are they doing? They're doing them payday loans, and they're jacking the interest rate up through the sky, but they can't go past 30% on military personnel. Somebody like me walks in, they can just charge me whatever they want to, but the Federal Trade Commission come out and said you cannot charge military people in much more than 30%. Now, hear me carefully. They were getting out of the military. You know, you can get out of the military because of financial hardships. And they was getting out of the military because of financial hardship because they couldn't pay the bills. And somebody stepped in and said, well, we got to go back. What happened to financial literacy that they taught in school? They don't do that anymore. How many of you home ec? Y'all remember home economics? It used to be in home ec, they taught you how to do regular thing. They had shop. See, when I was in school, you had shop. They taught you how to build a dog house. They taught you how to read a tape measure. Some shops taught you how to work on cars. Home ec taught you how to cook and would teach you how to balance a checkbook. A lot of people don't know how to write a check. So we're not getting involved. I'm just telling you, there's been a change since you went through school, and life has changed since things happened. Look at verse 1 of Proverbs chapter 6. This is Solomon talking to Rehoboam. Rehoboam's his son. Not real sure how old Rehoboam, somebody asked me this last week, how old is Rehoboam? I don't know. I'm pretty sure Rehoboam was in his early 20s in this. And remember, he had all the rights that a king's son had, and Solomon was prepping him to take over the kingdom. And very important that, I mean, can't you imagine your daddy being King Solomon, the richest king that's ever lived? You probably wasn't working out in the field, truth be known. So let's start. It said, my son, if thou be surety of thy friend, if thou hast stricken the hand with a stranger, he's saying, the very first word he's talking to my son, if. There is some decisions you and I have to make, and the middle word in the verse is thy friend. Sometimes your friend's going to talk you into doing things that you don't need to be doing because they're going to hurt you. They're not sinful, but they can violate a principle of the Word of God. Remember, jumping off a building is not a sin. That's not a sin to get up here on top of this church and jump off. That's not a sin. But as soon as you and I jump off, we're going to be faced with God's principle of gravity. And you're not going to go up, you're going to come down. And if you're a big boy like me, you know a little bit about physics, it's going to be bad. It's not the fall that kills you. It's that sudden stop at the end. When you and I just refuse to obey the principles of the Word of God, and we're going to go through a few of them tonight about finances. It's not a sin. If you got $40 in your pocket and you spend $41.50 at the gas station, you hadn't sinned. But you violated a principle that now you're broke. Anybody knows what broke means? Sure. Anybody had a post-dated check? Don't cash it till Friday. It's Good Friday. Sure. That's not the way to live, but we've all been there. Anybody ever hit a car from the reaper? No, let's don't do that. My son, if thou have surety, or if you're going to take on debt, you and I would use the term cosigner. Friend calls you, says, man, I got to have a car, I got to have a house, I got to do this. Go on the loan with me. Banks don't loan people money for a reason. They're broke. So they say, hey, you got to find this little thing in the fine print called a guarantor. Somebody, if you don't default on it, I can go after them. That's exactly what this verse is. He said, son, if you're going on debt for your friend, if thou hast stricken the hand with a stranger, thou art snared with the words of thy mouth. You ever been caught doing something for your friend that you thought you was trying to be good but turned into being bad? I was just trying to help them. Next thing I know, I got this gigantic bill I got to pay. We all, hopefully that we've learned our lesson, but that's exactly what he's saying. He's saying, son, be careful telling your friend you're going to go in debt for him. Debt's not bad. Debt's dumb according to Ramsey, but, sometimes we have to do it. Thou art snared with the words of thy mouth. Thou art taken with the words of thy mouth. He said, be careful. In the middle of verse 1, you don't have to. This is a son talking to a daddy. A daddy talking to a son. Son, don't do that. He said, if you're taken with the words of your mouth, if you've told him you're going to do it, you're snared now, son. See, this is the time when a man's word meant something. If you told him you was going to be somewhere at a certain time, you was there. And you worked hard. He said, thou art snared with the words of thy mouth. Thou art taken with the words of my mouth. Look at verse 3. Do this now, my son. Don't put it off. Don't do this immediately. Go to him, son. Humble yourself and make sure thy friend. You know what he's saying? He's saying, look, take care of it right now. Do not get involved with taking on debt for somebody else. Parents do it sometimes. In the back of their mind, they know that they probably have to end up paying for it, and things happen. I heard a story about two 18-year-old boys. One of them was out of high school. The one that's out of high school went to the one in high school and said, hey, co-sign on me this car, and that's normally what it is, normally a vehicle. Co-sign on me this car, and I'm going to take you to school every day. You ain't got to ride the school bus. Well, what high schooler wants to ride the school bus? Man, that ain't cool. Who wants to ride the cheese to school? I'm going to help my buddy. We're going to go to church together. We're going to ride in this new car we're going to get. The one that's out of high school's parents found out about it and went down to the boys in high school's house, knocked on his door, and said, hey, did my son come talk to you about co-signing on car with him? He said, yeah. He said, son, don't do that. He said, you're setting yourself up. He said, it's my kid. He don't make the brightest decision sometimes. And we could probably all stand up and say, you know what, I love my kids, but they act like the other parents sometimes. And you say, don't ever do that. Don't ever take on for somebody else something they're going to have to pay for. And looked at the boys' mom and daddy, said, I need to apologize to both y'all because my son was trying to get your son to do something they shouldn't, and I apologize to him, and I'm going to punish him when he gets home. I'm going to take him to school. I'm going to make sure he does right. Don't let him do that. So I appreciate that mom and I appreciate that parent going there and say, listen, I'm going to apologize on behalf of my son. He fixed to wreck your credit and his. That's what it's saying in verse 1. It said, my son, thou art surety for thy friend. Thou art taken, he says, thou art snared with the words of thy mouth, for thou art taken with the words of thy mouth. Do this now, my son, and deliver yourself. Right now. Don't put it off. Go to him. Make it right and say, listen, I need to apologize to you. I can't take on this debt for you. I cannot co-sign this with you. I just don't want to mess my future up. Look what it says. And we're talking about being selfish, but sometimes you got to be selfish about things. Look at the middle of verse 3. Do this now, thy son, and deliver who? Thyself. He said, son, you're going to have to protect yourself. You're going to have to watch your financial house because nobody else is going to watch it for you. Well, maybe I'll win the lottery. Okay, maybe, I'm going to outspend everything I make, and maybe I get my income tax back. Boy, this is a good time. Right now, getting taxes back. Tell you about a guy. When I was growing up, I was about 12 years old. I wasn't saved yet. Maybe I wasn't saved yet. Man down the street used to get back this enormous amount. He used to get like $2,000 back. Now, that was a lot of money now. That was a real lot of money 30 years ago. And he wouldn't work. His wife would come up to our house and use our telephone and call around, try to get people to help pay their bills and things like that. It used to make my grandmama mad. Boy, she used to just get mad. Well, they get $2,000 back at tax season. Had a broke down car in the driveway. Wouldn't go to work. You know what he did with that $2,000? I'll never forget it. Instead of getting the car fixed, he went and bought a remote control airplane. And I'll never forget it. It's about double the size of this at Lord's Supper. I thought pretty cool, 12 years old. He went down there and it took off. I'll never forget, it took him 2 days to build it. He didn't have a job, so he could work during the day and get built. It took off about $2,000, come back around and slammed into the ground. $2,000 just went to pieces. And I remember thinking as a 12-year-old kid, he could have done something else with that money. $2,000 is a lot of money. So what's happening? He said in verse 3, he said, protect yourself. Be careful. When thou art coming to the hand of thy friend, look what it says last part of verse 3. Humble thyself and make sure of thy friend. Remember what I told you when we got in the book of Proverbs? It was going to be kind of technical to start with, but then he's going to kick us in our teeth. He's kicking us in our teeth. He's talking about be careful about what you, this is just horse sense. Don't go into debt. Definitely don't go in debt with somebody else and things like that. Look at verse 4. He's talking about how to conduct yourself in verse 3. Give not sleep to thine eyes, nor slumber to thine eyelids. Be diligent. If you ever will go through Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace, he really hammers these verses. Be diligent to get out of it. Work hard. Pay close attention. He shows a picture of a lady's envelope, because back then, a long time ago, people used envelope systems, and the envelope had Hawaii on it. And what did she do? She put money in that Hawaii envelope and paid cash for it. And didn't charge it. Look at verse 5. Deliver thyself from a roe from the hand of the hunter, or a deer, and as a bird from the hand of the fowler. He said, you got to run fast. Be diligent to get out of debt, but to mainly get out of under an obligation, whether it be to a friend or a credit card or something. Remember now, debt's killing people. It sure is. And people sometimes just have to do what they got to do. I mean, I don't jump on people. Sometimes you got a single mama doing the best she can. I don't bust her chops. Before I bust somebody's chop, I want to see what I want to do about it. Kind of like I was serving on a staff of a church one time. Pastor called me in the office. There was a man sitting there, and he needed some gas money. Well, I didn't think nothing about it. I was going to reach in my wallet. The pastor said, "Hold on a second, Greg." He said, "I bought you in for a reason." Man had a shirt like I got on with 2 front pockets. Each pocket had 2 packets of cigarettes in them. He said, "Did you buy them cigarettes?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "But you coming asking me for gas money?" He said, "I don't think so." He said, "We ain't help you. Sorry about that, brother." But now guess what the man did? Got mad. Cussed the preacher out. Walked out. What did he get mad for? Why didn't he take some of that cigarette money and go buy him some gas? Really? Remember, hit Charleston. Why? All you got to do is let the Bible speak for itself. It does the lying work in our heart and life, don't it? Let's continue to read. So when he's talking about getting out of debt in verses 1 through verse 5. Then verse 6 shows up. Now he's talking about industry. Boy, if we ever needed something now. I heard the other day, maybe I read it. I read too much, really. Everything starts running together. But I read Noonan Times, Herald, I was reading the financial report. Here's what it's saying. Do you know it's saying that between the ages of 18 and 35, there are 4 million jobs that are waiting for people that age to go to work, and they won't. I mean, high-paying jobs. Look, they're starting people out now at $16, $17 an hour. That was a lot. That's what you used to work. You know, after you worked somewhere 20 years, you made that kind of money. They starting them out now. There's kids working at McDonald's in Noonan on the sign, $13 an hour. That's a lot of money. Can't get people to go to work. So it talks about industry starting in verse 6. And here's what he said. And this has always been a strange verse to me. I'm going to explain to you why. Look at verse 6 of Proverbs chapter 6. "Go to the ant, thou sluggard. Consider her ways and be wise." Now let's break this apart. What is Solomon doing watching ants? This is what he did. He probably walked up one day and put his foot in the middle of it and begin to see the ants. And then if you ever want to study some ants, they're industrious little guys. I'm not really sure why God made them, because all they do is bite you. They are kind of fun when you put an M80 in them. Don't do this, though. I don't do it. Got to be careful. But you watch them. You got one queen, and she makes all these other ants, and it can rain, there be nothing in your front yard. You wake up the next morning, looks like a bomb went off, because they're just ant hills everywhere. So Solomon looked at his son, and look at this in verse 6 now. He's saying, "Son, you're a sluggard. Consider her ways and be wise." He said, "Son, you need to tighten up." He said, "Go out there and look at them ants. Put your foot in the middle of that ant bed, back up while I watch what happens." They're diligent. They build. They don't let around. They got goals. I mean, how many people have built businesses and the kids take them over and kill them? I mean, that's just day in. You read about that all the time. That parents work hard and sacrifice and provide good for their family. Junior comes up and destroys the company. Why? Because he don't have the work ethic Daddy does. He wants to spend freely and all that other stuff. And there's a whole bunch of stories about that. But now he's looking at his son in verse 6. Every once in a while, you got to look at your kids and say, "You need to tighten it up. Something's wrong, son. Something's wrong, honey. Be diligent. Go to the ant, thou sluggard. Consider her ways and be wise." Pay attention to what it's doing, son. Look in verse 7 and watch this now. They don't have no guide, overseer, or ruler. Outside that, verse 7, you and I could write the word alarm clock. They ain't got anybody tell them to get out of bed. They get out of bed. They go to work. Be diligent. And it says, which having no guide, nothing, nobody's telling them to do right. You step in the middle of an ant bed, nobody's going to say, "Okay, you got to do this, you got to go do this, you got to." No. They know what they're supposed to do and they do it. Very important. And they're industrious little creatures. There's a guy that preaches a whole sermon. He's got a series of sermon on ants and eagles. It's a pretty good little sermon too. He breaks it all apart. How industrious they are and how they dig and tunnel and they're protected. Now they're weak. Sure they are. But boy, you pull them together and you let one get in your shoe, make you say things you don't mean. Oh my gosh. And they'll move up your pants leg that fast. That's right. I don't know why God made them. I don't know why God made beavers either. I don't. Aggravating. Little ants just bite you all the time. Little beavers. I hate beavers. Hate ants too. I don't hate anything like I hate frogs. Ooh, I hate frogs. Would you have no guide, overseer? Well, nobody tells them to get out of bed. By the way, if you're a functioning human being, you ought to get out of bed. Crazy. Look at verse 8. Provides her meat in the summer. Pay close attention to this now. He's preaching at him. Now he's talking to his son. He's saying, son, you're a sluggard. You're lazy boy. Get up. Nobody's going to be around trying to tell you to do this all the time. Verse 8. Provides her meat in the summer. If you ain't got to have it right in your Bible, verse 8. She takes care of herself. Don't ask anybody to take care of her. She works hard. There was a time when there was some men and some women that took care of themselves, worked hard. And you read Proverbs 31, that lady did. She took care of herself, took care of her family, and provided for other people. But she took care of herself. Provides her. By the way, if I don't take care of myself, I can't take care of anybody else. Do you know that? Very important. Provides her meat in the summer and gather her food in the harvest. That means she saved something. She got her whatever she did. She put some up, give some away, but she took care of herself. So now he's talking to him about some ants. He's talking to him about taking care of himself. You know he says a Rehoboam? Because he knew in the back of his head, Rehoboam was going to be the king. When Solomon was gone, Rehoboam was going to come on the scene. Boy, can't you imagine running around with daddy's credit card? If you want to read something funny, read about the sheiks in Saudi Arabia. Got gold-plated BMWs, diamond-encrusted Mercedes. If they don't ever put gas in them, they just run out of gas. They just leave it on the side of the road. Why? Because we know how much something costs. We know the value of nothing. Because people keep giving us stuff. Years ago, I was listening to Neil Boortz. And here's what Neil Boortz said. So there was a situation up in Alpharetta. They was building back then $200,000 houses. That's funny now. But they was building $200,000. That's how long this ago it's been in Alpharetta. Said a kid was going over there and burning the houses down. I mean, just wooden structure, catching them on fire. So another kid at the other side of town of Alpharetta was going in and stealing tools. Now here's what they found out. Both of them was against the law. Here's what they found out. The kid that was burning down the $200,000 houses drove a Jeep to school during the week and had a Mercedes-Benz to drive around as a weekend car. We're talking about a high school kid. Because mom and dad gave him a Beamer, a Jeep, and then a BMW, on the weekend because it was convertible and had to take care of that BMW. Somebody may ding the car. The kid on the other side of town that was stealing stuff, they didn't have any food. So he was going around stealing stuff and selling it. Both of them's wrong. Stealing. But here's what they said. Kids that are rich, or kids that are given everything, don't know the value of nothing. So they just burn the thing down. Kids that struggle steal because they don't know the value of integrity. Same issue. So somebody burning down. That's what he's trying to teach him here. He knows Solomon, but Rehoboam is going to be king. And by the way, Rehoboam mistreated his people because Rehoboam didn't learn this lesson. And said, my daddy treated you like this. I'm going to treat you tougher because you work for me. They said, shoot, forget this. And literally split the kingdom. You'll never have any idea. You ever been to a funeral where they're going to read the will? That's funny. Where there's a will, there's a relative. Mom ain't got two nickels rubbed together, but she dies. All of a sudden, she becomes the widow of Sam Walton. I know Mama's got $500,000 insurance policy. Provides her meat, verse 8. Saves, takes care of herself. Verse 9, and here's where he gets on him. He said, how long were you going to sleep, you sluggard? When will you rise out of sleep? Get up. Look at the end of verse 9, right? If you got to have it right in your Bible, right? No laziness. So I don't know what was going to Rehoboam. He may have slept till lunchtime, 1 o'clock, when he's supposed to be up doing stuff. Can't work if you're in the bed all the time. By the way, you can't work for God if you're in the bed all the time. Do you know that? Let me take you to the Garden of Gethsemane. You remember the Garden of Gethsemane? Jesus was going through the greatest temptation of his life. Walked up to Peter, the inner circle, and says, why are you sleeping? Get up and pray. And done that 3 times. So he busted him pretty good. Verse 9 says, how long will you sleep, O sluggard? Get up. And when will thou rise out of sleep? He said, you're lazy. He said, don't be lazy. Get up. Be diligent. You're supposed to be at work sometime? Get to work on time. Be diligent. Give 8 hours work for 8 hours pay. Well, I hate my job. Well, why are you there? Work there. A job isn't a life sentence. You can move around if you want to. This is America. You're not entitled. You ain't bogged down anywhere. But while you're there, be diligent. Here's what it says in verse 10 and 11. Verse 10 and 11 talks about laziness. Yet a little sleep, a little slumber, a little fold of hands to sleep. Look at verse 11. So shall thy poverty come. Now, is poverty going to come? Yes, there's not a question about it. It's kind of like those saying, if you don't have money to pay your bills on Black Friday, they're going to cut your power off. You're going to have Black Saturday and Sunday too. That's the truth. Thy poverty is going to come. Why? Because we won't get out of bed and go to work. We got a generation who we owe them something. Can't you imagine if we went to war right now? I mean, that kind of scares me because there's some trouble going on in that big pond. And can't you imagine them calling up a generation that, according to verse 9 and 10, sleep all the time? Verse 11 says, so shall thy poverty come. It's coming. Well, I'm tired of being poor. Get up. Talked to a lady yesterday. Her daughter's working 2 jobs. Working during the day and waiting tables at night. They got 4 kids. She married to a little junior woodchuck, and he don't work because his back hurts all the time, and just having a tough time. And he can go ride motorcycles. That's pretty active, isn't it? Jumping motorcycles. Yeah, sure. And she said, what should you do? I said, well, if I was that girl, I'd get my 4 kids and I'd move home and get back, or he would move out. Said, she's got 5 kids. What do you mean? She's taking care of those 4 and that bum. Preacher, you call him a bum? In the Greek, I call him a bum. Why'd you call him that? Because that's what he is. That's what he is. These girls, he's going to get a job when we get married. Don't marry him till he gets a job. Make sure he's going to take care of you because, honey, you're going to be paying all them bills. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little fold on the hands to sleep. So shall thy poverty come as one that traveleth, and thou won't as an armed man. I want this. Well, work for it. Work for it. There was a man, Lord, this got to be a big fight in this family. Man's son, I don't remember what happened, but anyway, family had to move back in with the mom and daddy. That's fine, things happen. But adult son, adult wife, 3 or 4 kids, adult man moves in, quits his job. Dad goes talk to his son, Rehoboam and Solomon, and said, son, you need to step your game up a little. You need to go get you a job. Well, Daddy, I figured since I was here and you're my dad, you can help me because these are your grandkids. He said, they're not my kids. Those are your kids. I raised my kids. Junior Woodchuck gets mad at his daddy. What did he get mad at his daddy for? See, here's the problem. We want privileges without responsibility. Did you know that? We've taken and taken and taken, and I'm telling you, one day we're going to have to pay. And so Junior Woodchuck and his wife gets mad. Now what did they do? They go get their place? Oh, no. They moved over with her mom and daddy. And they was having some explosions over there, but I don't know them that well. Well, preacher, this is crazy. This happens every day. This is something that's plaguing the church today. Why? Because we've quit raising and teaching people how to be fiscally responsible. We hand people what they want, and they don't have to work for it. We're in a mess, and people expect everybody else to pay for them. There's a book by Larry Burkett called The Coming Economic Earthquake. Here's what he said. He said, we've paid and paid and paid. We've gave and gave and gave, and one day we're going not to be able to give anymore. The Tilly's eventually going to run out. Do you know that? And they're going to be riding in the streets when they can't get what they want. Why? Because we've stopped teaching them. Be people of industry. Be people of work. Save. Thrift. Oh, preacher, this is dumb. This needs to be preached in every pulpit in America. Because I'm telling you, churches are bound by this stuff. Preachers get bound. There ain't nobody that's hurt financially like preachers are. Because, preachers charge stuff, and preachers just send churches in themselves into bad financial problem. But if we listen to what Solomon told Rehoboam, we wouldn't do that, would we? We'd say, you know what? I'm going to work hard. If I want something, I'm going to say, well, preacher, I want to buy me a boat. Buy you a boat. Just if you can, pay cash for it. You might not be able to buy a brand new one. Diligent, persistent, work hard. Get out of bed.